Yeah, have you ever read Max Stirner?
Max Turner?
Yeah.
No.
Oh, yeah, he was an Eagles like Ayn Rand and stuff like that. So,
Yeah.
and Friedrich Nietzsche.
No, I recently read the book Sentient, and that was actually very interesting because I know some guys that are more hostile to the black pill, which obviously is a very broad subject in itself, but they bring up the pheromones, and it's
Yeah.
interesting because this book provided a lot of recent, ideas that actually pushes back against that as this sort of decisive notion. But there's another gentleman, I haven't read his book yet, but he's pretty high up in one of the research departments that focuses on smell in different species, and he believes there are no pheromones in human beings, period, that they're not relevant. So I thought that was
Yeah.
interesting.
I've had a pheromone attack. It's not fun. Just
Yeah.
randomly somebody walks in and then like you gotta like leave because like this is not normal.
Yeah.
So, and I actually talked to Zach about this once before. So,
Yeah.
welcome in.
Welcome.
I guess we're
How's it
here with
going?
Goldberg. Yeah. So tonight we're going to be talking about the sexual marketplace and just some different theories and stuff like that. What do you think about this? The constant like attempt to grandfather the family and just stable relationship connections.
In terms of like that as an ideal that's put out
Yeah,
there.
yeah, like the divorce rates continually accelerating, for example.
Yeah, I think it goes back to that whole dynamic where human beings tend to look for a close anchor. And so whatever we see in relatively recent history, because as bizarre as it sounds, if you listen to these YouTubers that talk about back in the 50s or whatever, there were
Yeah,
periods, even, 1800s, early 1900s, where a lot of men were single. And maybe not as many as now, but a lot of guys were not getting married. And if you go back further, looking at Ed Dutton's work prior to the rise of Christianity, you actually have this monopolization of a lot of women by richer men, and other dudes are disenfranchised, so they either have to resort maybe to prostitution or join the conquest, go get their women, that kind of mentality. So
yeah,
I think it's one of the unfortunate realities where there's only so much history taught in school, and obviously a society has to impart some idea of what's going to allow it to remain stable. So most people don't have that realization. So they assume, okay, I'm going to hit a certain age, I'm going to find a person, we're going to get married, have kids, and I'll be essentially, in a weird way, and probably now more than ever, a lot of these guys feel if they just get that woman, they're good and they can stop worrying about it. And
yeah,
of course, as we see with the explosion of the hypergamy and all this nonsense, even that is not secure.
yeah,
There's so many things that are going against you, and it's not to make anyone depressed, but you can't deny this stuff that's directly in front of you. I think it's
yeah,
the whole, and a lot of it comes from the boomers. That's not to like just use them as a meme, but I call it like the boomer bewilderment syndrome, where they can't comprehend that anything would change, that it's not just like it was back in the day. Which even there, if you were a boomer and you grew up in the 60s and 70s, there was a whole lot of just debauched degeneracy going on there. So it's not like it was a wonderland just
yeah,
several decades back. So
yeah.
No,
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, well, everybody has to let loose. So I mean, you're always gonna see that, even in cultures that are supposedly so conservative, have a let loose period, such as like the Amish. I mean, even they allow you to go out into the world at a certain age and explore it to see if, oh, do I want to stay within the English world, or am I comfortable with the traditions of my own culture?
Yeah,
yeah,
and I think there's a narrow, there's just like you said, Martin. There's this narrow view that there's only one particular way for the sexual marketplace to work. G.K. Chesterton had a quote. I'm going to butcher this, but it's saying basically you
Mhm.
want to dissolve the marketplace that you built up and just leave it with nothing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know, they used to use co-regulation of the sexes, and that was the Christian, you know, with the Western perspective for the longest time, but it hasn't worked out like they expected to after the sexual revolution. So
Yeah, and I've been recently, for one literary project I might do in the future, but I've been reading a couple of biographies of like the German leadership, the 20s and 30s, and I thought it was very interesting that, I mean, these dudes were, maybe not all of them uniformly, but they were experiencing very much the same thing. You have to consider that's a far more homogenous and conservative culture than anything we have today.
Mhm.
Like
yeah,
Himmler married a woman who was almost 10 years older. She'd previously been married.
Yeah.
I believe Goebbels, both of the women he was with had previously been married. Hitler had to step in and basically tell them knock it off because they were going to split up because Goebbels was banging these other women. She was banging another guy.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is performative, I think. And it's not to diminish, some people have good marriages, but I think there's this assumption that, you know, once you get that rock on the finger, things are okay, but it's a very
Mhm.
difficult process. I know people that have been married 30 plus years and they're fighting like cats and dogs. And the
Yeah.
only reason I think they're not split up is because maybe they grew up where you don't do that.
yeah.
Or there's other reasons.
It was shamed and looked down
Yeah.
upon.
But you see how
Well,
easy it is nowadays. I mean, that's why, and again, I understand the perspective to the degree that we all have to have our own myths and our own justifications to stay sane. But
Yeah.
you'll see these
Mhm.
guys when they are presented with information that we might talk about, and it's a guy who's married or he's got like an LTR. And they'll be like, oh, yeah, you guys are all losers. You just, you know, go outside, touch grass, talk to people. And you can tell there's an element of projecting their own fears where they know, what if this
Mhm.
happens to me? What if this
Yeah.
is true? You
Yeah.
know, just because you're safely ensconced in a marital union doesn't mean, oh, it's not going to impact you. And I mean, I've seen girls that come from like immigrant backgrounds actually off the boat and they spent more of their life in that country. And social media, it only takes a couple of years and they will be indoctrinated in all that same stuff. And you're dealing with a totally changed person. So,
Yeah.
um,
I know some people that live in Korea, and they tell me that the businessmen and stuff like that, they won't date Korean women. They'll go off to poor countries to try to find brides and stuff like that, because
okay,
they know they're not going to be like a lot of resistance. You know,
yeah, I think actually a gentleman I know that he's from Korea, he said that Vietnam and Cambodia are very popular spots to just get the supposedly more submissive women because the Korean women have experienced wealth and empowerment. So that's
Yeah.
how it goes. And I think that's the central point, which is that if women are financially, economically independent, it's a bit of a pipe dream to think you're going to have these traditional conservative families because
yeah,
she's not reliant on a man. I mean, of course, her standards are going to go up realistically, and she has the ability to move away. And if the legal system allows her to take the man's resources, you know, even more so.
And
um,
that's where it kind of comes along with it, is it's all based on that resource fidelity with that typically traditionally the man had, and then the sexual and the reproductive fidelity that a woman had. Give her the resources, and you're going to be a little bit more decentralized.
yeah. And if you look back to like stuff that Molyneux's talked about in the past, like the Native American population, I mean that probably could apply there because there was a lot more reproduction because there's a lot less resistance. Another thing is if you think about like George Washington, he had the truth about George Washington program, and he's talking about how his mom basically turned him into a surrogate husband, and then it kind of drove him mad after a while. And
Yeah.
when she passed away, that's when he really just let go of everything, and it was just pretty violent. So
Well, didn't George Washington end up marrying a widow? Well, it wasn't, what was Martha, right? She was a
yeah,
widow, and she was like 10 years his junior or senior.
yeah,
Yeah, well, I think if I'm correct, Madison married a widow, and like he had a very unruly stepson that no one could deal with, but supposedly he understood the
Yeah.
kid. Benjamin Disraeli. There's a really good, if you've ever seen the miniseries with, he's the dude, I forget the name. He was in that Western show that had like, was kind of Shakespearean, but with a bunch of F-bombs. I forget the name.
Yeah.
He was also in, he played Blackbeard in the Pirates of the Caribbean movie, but he plays Disraeli, and it's a brilliant scene where he's trying to court this woman who's significantly older, because at some level he actually wants her fortune. And she's like, "Do you really love me?" Like, so even there, I mean, that's a guy who becomes prime minister of the UK, and he's going for an older woman. So
Yeah. And I think the way that the sexual marketplace is going is going to create a lot more nonconformity, which will just basically be its downfall. I mean, a big cause of all this was probably, if I don't know if you know anything about the Social Security movement, but they were basically trying, it's the precursor to feminism, and they were, well, the thing about G.K. Chesterton, he was talking about, you know, dissolving the sexual marketplace with and replacing it with nothing. So people get emotionally involved in these narratives, and then they don't think about the consequences of their actions, and then it's just a never-ending cycle.
yeah, and I think, I mean, one of the central problems is that there really is no accountability for whatever women do. I mean, a woman can mistreat a man horribly. And if you notice, if any guy goes online, and not even in an angry way, but just lays out what happened, what is the immediate response? Not just from women, but also from men. "Oh, it's your fault. Oh, you're screwed up. It's your problem." You know, that whole setup. Like, you look at the essence of the red pill self-improvers, which there's nothing wrong with improving yourself, but it's always based upon this idea that a woman can be at like the bare minimum, and you always are lacking, and you better, you know, get your ass in shape and do all this stuff. And it's like, well, yeah, I realize that's how nature is going to work, but it does say a lot about society that no one's actually telling women seriously, if you do this, there are consequences. I mean, yeah, you might get lectured by Kevin Samuels, but there's no real consequences.
Yeah. Tom Woods had a guest on. Well, do you want to make a point?
Oh, no, go ahead.
Tom Woods had a guest on, and like you said, that there's no consequences. And he was, I guess she was a men's rights activist. I can't remember. It's been for a couple of years now, but it was basically saying how, you know, the regulations for the legal system is set up so that there are consequences for men if they were to abandon their husband or their wives or their children, but there are no consequences for women. So deadbeat dads, yeah, throw the book at them. Deadbeat moms, give them a reward.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably no coincidence that we've seen in the last decade, especially, I've seen it even in country music, this deification of single moms, which again, there are legitimate cases where it's not their fault. There are abusive men out there, but it's this whole thing of being a single mom is actually a badge of honor, you know, almost like it's something to aspire to. So, but that's the other thing. When I'd been researching the last book, I found out that there were laws in effect until the 70s where if a woman was on birth control, she would have a hard time getting a mortgage or renting an apartment. If she wasn't married, same thing. So those are going to be some controls that make it more like, okay, you need to get married, even if you're not really inclined towards it. So that creates more stability, but we don't have that anymore.
I think a big problem is that we've got this roadmap. It's not really an official roadmap. It's not like anybody started this intentionally, but everyone wants to keep changing the rules and how things have worked out. And there's no clear-cut path and direction for people to follow, because once you do something, like I said, it becomes too emotionally draining for them or too difficult for them to handle, then they appeal to authority, and it just keeps spiraling out of control. So
yeah, and I think one thing that's also contributing to it in part, I want to say it was the guy, he's a smaller YouTuber. He actually doesn't like me much, but he does have some cool content, City Crusher. and he had done a video in response to Black Pigeon Speaks, because Black
Yeah.
Pigeon Speaks was essentially anti-immigration, but pointing out the fact that it's especially a problem if you have a bunch of men that are coming in as competition. And
Yeah.
he's like, oh, that's just anti-male. But if you think about it, if you took migration and it was, let's say, 80-90% women, I honestly believe it would not be as big of a deal, because then you're like, well, at least you've got something out of that, right? Whereas you're
Yeah.
bringing in a bunch of sexual competition in an environment where it's already pretty bad for average men, it's just going to get worse. In fact, my friend had done this little experiment on OkCupid a few years ago, put this chick up, right? Very basic profile. And this was instantaneously. I mean, from the first day, over 400 likes, over 200 messages. And I would say probably 70-80% of them were these, obviously immigrant men, probably like on STEM visas, that kind of thing, just sending these throwaway pickup lines. So it's like, that's going to be, that is going to become an issue. I also believe there are these guys now pushing the passport bro movement, like go overseas or even, pay to play. But I think you're going to see even that market inflating, because when dudes in the US figure out what's going on, let's say they've got a decent job, they're going to be going down there and just throwing money at the women. And so the women are going to be like, well, shoot, I don't have to take $50 anymore. I can ask, 300-400. So we're going to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I think a big part of the problem is that the monetary system has become so unstable over time that it's difficult to find that foundation. It's basically converted the sexual marketplace into a form of quicksand. So
yeah, and that's the whole thing too. If you as a guy don't start out with adequate resources, unless, let's say, and it's funny enough that I can't tell you the number of times I've come across like staunch libertarians on the internet that advise people to join the military, which I think is kind of funny. But
it's a contradiction.
If you join the military, I guess you could get the GI Bill, you'd have an opportunity. And I've seen people get out of poverty that way, but if for whatever reason, medically you can't get in, or it's just not an option. Now, of course, if you don't get the whole forced injection thing, you can't get in. So that becomes an issue too, because in the past, a guy who got to having a somewhat decent job, which in the 50s, even the 60s, a regular guy could get an okay factory job where you can move up, maybe eventually become like a manager at the plant or whatnot. And you can, there was a professor I had in college that his dad, their family was 7 kids, and he worked for John Deere. He was able to put 7 kids through college on one salary, right? That's very difficult to do now for a host of different reasons. And as much as women are also making money themselves, they're going to go like, why should I settle for this dude making the same or less? They want something more. So it's not enough to just show up and have a job anymore.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of Red Savine?
Who's that?
The country musician.
Brett.
Red Savine.
No.
Well, he's got a song. He's talking about how his dad used to walk 15 miles to get to work, and how everybody stayed at the farm and stuff like that. And I mean, they made like $1, $2 a day, and people survived off of that. And now people can't even afford. They're almost up to 3 people now just to break even. It seems like anymore. So
yeah, and that comes into conflict with the. Whether you want to say, I'd say fairly recent, as in the last 50, 60 years, but this obsession with the individual to the extent that, like, there are parents that say, if my kid wants to stay in the house, they're 18, I'm going to kick them in the pants or whatever. Like, that's not acceptable, especially for white Americans. That's not seen to be acceptable. You need to get out on your own. Well, doing so is arguably financial suicide for a lot of people, or at the very least, it's going to hold you back for a time. If you're doing it that way. So there's a whole lot of changes that are running up against that more traditional boomerite culture. And unfortunately, I don't have any confidence in our elected leaders to really seize the metal. I think that they're completely, like I said, they're bewildered. Like, no, this isn't how it was. Well, it's not going to be that way probably ever again or anytime soon.
Yeah. What do you think? You think that there's going to be a form of like sexual marketplace mutiny that's going to happen anytime soon. So
Well,
like
my
it goes
theory,
against
yeah.
sorry,
No,
goes
go
against the
ahead.
narrative.
I just think that as more and more men become disenfranchised, obviously there's a theory, well, the VR or the dolls, I don't believe that's going to anytime soon replace human touch. I don't
Yeah,
believe that. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm actually a boomer, but I think there's a danger when you have so many young men that are disenfranchised, and it's not just, of course, okay, they've got a good job. No, they're disenfranchised economically, they're disenfranchised sexually, but also culturally. Men are spat on, particularly men that embody what they were probably raised to be relatively like a straight male. You're
yeah,
degraded for that reason. So I think you're going to see at some level more dudes, either whether they're going to go the gay way or they're going to actually become trans themselves because they want to get more attention. The other thing is that if you just have a lot of guys that are disenfranchised, you look historically, that typically leads to some kind of political upheaval. And
yeah,
the question is, what direction is it going to go? Is it going to be like a more fundamentalist religious one? Is it going to be right wing? Is it going to be left wing? Is it going to be something else? But I do think that's coming. And I don't believe that. I think we're going to reach a point where it's not going to be enough for the government to say, well, here, we'll give you basic income. We'll just try to,
yeah,
apply you. I don't think it's going to work. And that's the problem with the internet too, is that in the past, you might have been some depressed person in your small town, just doing your own thing. Okay, this is the life I have to accept. Hopefully in heaven, I'll be rewarded. Or if you're,
yeah.
believe in reincarnation, I'll have a better life. But now you're going on the internet, you're like, oh, there's a lot of people like me. And why is this happening? And you see the government that will pass a COVID relief bill and send basically crumbs to the people and bail out the companies that are still firing folks. That's going to elicit a negative reaction over time. It's just a question of who's going to organize it and channel it.
Think about Sky King, but like, on steroids.
Yeah.
So
sounds like a lot of Trump supporters, honestly.
Yeah.
So
But now, have you guys ever heard of Lux Maximus?
yeah,
Yeah, so he had that one video where he was explaining how the middle-aged Trump guy that got upset at this liberal woman is essentially an incel themselves, but they're in denial.
Yeah.
So a lot of that, the whole like, I'm such a patriot, is a projection of their frustrations. That would be interesting if there's a study of like amongst baby boomers or even Gen Xers, even if they are married, how many of them are effectively in dead bedroom relationships?
it's concerning because it seems like, it's becoming more and more risky just to have a job, because if you say something inappropriate, then you seriously risk getting terminated for something that really could mean nothing. So
Yeah, and it's not even like they said in the past, the MGTOW claim was, well, it's a contract between you, her, and the state. But
yeah,
it's not just that. In a way, if you ever dealt with her friends as the influence, but now her friends has expanded to social media, and it's like an onslaught you really can't resist. That's why I hear a lot of this about maintaining frame, and I really believe that at best, maintaining frame with a woman is, you are going to a rest stop on the road to her. Eventually, she's going to get the better of you. I mean, regardless of what we say intellectually or physically, at least in terms of emotional intelligence and communication, I think most women are heads and shoulders above men. I don't think most men even realize what's going on. I mean, it's obviously to some extent evolved or developed over time, because if you aren't as physically dominant, you have to use persuasion, manipulation, whatever. But it's incredible. They can be, 7 chess moves ahead of the guy, and he's like, oh yeah, I'm maintaining frame with her. So yeah, good luck, buddy.
Yeah.
'Cause,
3D chess in the sexual marketplace.
Yeah.
I never understood the concept of game. Like I get it, but like you said, I think a long time ago, what's the point after you're married? It's infighting. It's spatting. There's no real growth.
Yeah, and of course, once you bring kids into the picture, I mean, you can't exactly maintain frame, because that could be detrimental to them. What do you, oh, I'm just walking away. Well, you're going to walk away from
Yeah.
your kids too. Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
just,
And then you get arrested and go to jail for
yeah.
for insignificant disputes.
Yeah. So I understand they're trying to give a form of therapy to these guys, but I just think it's not moving them in the right direction, because at a certain point, either the society, the government has to collapse, which I don't see that happening in the near future, or you're going to have to face the facts that you need to get involved and try to change that stuff, because it's not going to get better because people maintain frame. I mean, there's only so much you can do when you're going up against the state, and all they have to do is say something about you on social media. You're going to lose your job. You're going to be blacklisted. So
yeah, I mean, I think the capitulation of the financial system is probably the best solution for a lot of problems, including this.
Yeah.
So.
And that's one area where you also have to be careful with conservatives, to the extent that they tend to be very willing to give handouts to corporations. And this is one of the things, the book I'm working on now, how that doesn't work in the way they assume, because there's this assumption, which maybe was more true in the past. Like I know ExxonMobil was kind of hostile to LGBT for a while, but they thought, okay, as long as we take care of your interests, low taxes, deregulation, give you write-offs, give you job subsidies, you're going to let us pursue our other areas like the socially conservative matters. But you see how in a lot of these states, North Carolina, Indiana, even Wisconsin, the governors, the legislators just gave the entire town to the corporations. And then they try to do, okay, we don't want, transgenders in bathrooms with little girls. Oh, we're going to boycott you. We're going to try to shut down your state, do damage. It's.
Yeah.
So.
And if you don't go along with the narrative, then you're ostracized. And, there's a book, both myself and Zach read up by Sal the Agorist. I don't know if you know who that is. But in it basically they're talking about how in the Soviet Union, if you didn't go along with the narrative, then they cut you off completely.
Yeah. And
it seems to be accelerating. Like I said earlier about quicksand, we like Max Stirner is an eco-anarchist. He had this quote. We were talking about this in our last video. He says, "The men of the future will fight for rights that we don't even miss." And it seems to be slow. I mean, I just finished reading the 24 books of the Bible, and even back then, from what I can tell, that was a slowly growing process. Is that you have these ideas, and the society is binding together, and if you don't go along with it, then you're ostracized and outcast. You're a bad neighbor.
Oh yeah.
So,
and you see just how quickly people, go along to get along. I mean, the last couple of years with this whole mostly scamdemic thing, and just, it's embarrassing. Just the capitulation of people that should, I mean, a lady today who, granted, she was anti doing the whole thing. So we've kind of had common cause on that, but she is a chain smoker. And she's telling me like, oh, maybe you should wear a mask because there's some bug going around. I'm going, wear a mask. You're a chain smoker. Like, it's just, there's a lot of that whole thing where people, I guess they compartmentalize too much, and they're not able to see those things. Because I remember even when the hypocrisy was called out, where they were saying the lockdown protests are going to spread COVID, but the social justice protests won't. And there were people actually defending that point of view and saying like, how are you capable of doing this? Yeah. And if you don't get too upset about, they'll just throw in some more stuff like murder hornets. So yeah, I don't know. What do you think, Zach?
I'm just listening.
Yeah.
Who's that behind you, the old man? Is that like looks like a aging Tony Stark or something?
It's Victor Sullivan.
Oh, nice.
From the Uncharted series.
Oh, nice.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll be right back after the sponsor shot. Thanks for joining us. We'll be there in just a minute.
どうして教室？
それ貸して。
書け。
え？
書くの。春日君の真実のこと全部。佐伯奈々子の体操着盗んでありとあらゆるところにこすりつけまくって、それ着てデートしておまけにそのまま告白までしたクソ人間の完全変態は私、春日隆夫ですって。それでこの体操着置いとけば明日学校に来た佐伯さんに見てもらえるよ。
こすりつけてないし、っていうかそれじゃ他のやつにもバレるじゃないか。
そうだよ、当たり前じゃん。はっ、早く書けっつってんだろ。書けよ。
違う、俺はそんなこと望んでな。
飯が良すぎるよ春日くん。佐伯さんにだけいい感じに懺悔してさっぱりしたいなんて何様？
違う。
おまけに私に伝えろだ。思い上がんのもいい加減にしろよ、全身皮かむり野郎。
俺はただ佐伯さんにふさわしい人間になりたいんだ。俺は普通になりたいんだよ。
ばっかり。結局春日くんも他のやつらと同じなんだ。ゲロみたいな話でゲロみたいに笑ってクソみたく固まって群れて、誰が誰のこと好きだの誰が誰のこと嫌いだの死んだ方がマシのカスどもまんじゅうどもときれい事ばっか吐きやがって。どいつもこいつも腹ん中はセックスセックス。結局クソセックスがしたいだけ。ああ、つまんないつまんないつまんないつまんないつまんないつまんないつまんないつまんないつまんないつまんないつまんないつまんない。もう契約は終わり。二度と私に口聞かないで。さよなら。
中村さん、中村さん。ちくしょう。これでどうだ。
それだけ？
So, what do you think about if you go back in history, like in Japan, people used to just go and visit people's houses and in the night, and that's how they would find marriage and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think there was a similar setup with some of the Indian tribes in the United States. It was relatively loose, although if I'm remembering correctly, it was a book about Kit Carson, and I want to say it was the Cheyenne that were a lot more conservative, but the Navajo, it was this expectation like you don't leave the tent or whatnot till she's pregnant. You know, it was a very big public spectacle, just like Tahiti was that way. It was almost like this demonstration everyone would watch. It was, you know, spectators and whatnot. So I don't know. I wonder if there's some element to and I'm forgetting the book off the top of my head. It was one that I cited where he said, if you looked at the whole character of Odysseus in the Odyssey and the Iliad, that was indication of a cultural transformation, because Odysseus, while all the other guys would just kind of sleep around and be all degenerate, Odysseus was committed to going back to his wife. And that was the whole concept, that to have a higher civilization, you needed some semblance of monogamy. Otherwise,
Yeah.
everyone's just going to be, willy-nilly screwing each other. And
Yeah. I definitely think, like, it's gonna sound weird. I remember seeing or reading that when a horse gets pregnant, if they don't go around and reproduce with other horses, then the child the I guess mare the child the horse that was born gets killed by the pack. So that's why they do this kind of thing. You
Yeah.
might have talked about this. I can't remember. I remember reading or hearing it somewhere, and it's just, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think there were, I want to say amongst chimpanzees, where they would have a designated male that had access to the women. And if the younger, let's say younger male and female would try to copulate, they would actually be physically attacked by others. It's like, that's not your role, or at least not yet.
Yeah.
But that goes into the whole question where guys talk about being the alpha male, and getting to the status of the alpha male, depending on the animal species, is not, well, necessarily you're the best and you challenge them. You could actually take advantage when they're not looking or they're weaker and just, eliminate them. And for a time, at least, you have that privileged status.
Yeah.
But that was one of the biggest, I don't consider myself black pilled hardcore, but one of the biggest ones I came across was in the book Wildhood, where there was a species of fly, and they were studying them and showing the males would approach a female, and it would be a very intricate set of, trying to get her attention, essentially.
Yeah.
And the rejection rate was close to 90% among flies. And people are going, oh, this is old nonsense. It's not that complicated with humans. I'm like, honestly, if flies are doing that, it should point you in a certain direction.
Yeah.
Like I said, we've been so indoctrinated by this Victorian romanticism that people don't want to let it go, in large part because not that they know it's untrue, but they're afraid of it being true for themselves. So that's why oftentimes they propagandize against it.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, what do you think is going to happen when the monetary system significantly changes and the financial stability? It won't be so expensive for people to stay home all the time like it used to be in like the 1800s and stuff like that, 1700s. Do you think that we might return to more stable family values, or do you think it's going to accelerate and cause more I guess, social pollution?
I think it would depend heavily on to what extent women still control resources.
Yeah.
It's sort of the whole dynamic where if you had some kind of basic income, if that ever becomes a thing, assuming it has value, because it could just be inflated to worthlessness. But
to the moon.
if they have it too, does it change? So it's not just a question of, is money worth more, but who's actually making the money and who has that control. I do believe if you went to a more apocalyptic scenario, the typical chick outside of, I have seen some girls now getting into powerlifting, which I'm not attracted to that at all, but maybe they would stand a fighting chance. But like, the girl I was dating recently, I mean, she was like 5'4", maybe 105 pounds. Like, yeah, you're not going to be doing much. So unless you have a skill that you can exchange for resources, and even there, you're probably going to be in a subservient position. So
yeah. Do you know anything about the Enneagram?
About the what?
About the Enneagram?
No, I haven't heard of that.
Okay, it's a personality system, and I guess technically the conformist female, of male and female, would be the Enneagram 9. That they're most emotionally stable sort of people. I guess you could look into it. it basically charts out childhood wounds and stuff like that, and it helps you get a perspective of what someone's going to be like, kind of like the Myers-Briggs type indicator, but it's more concise.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, and I think it would also be interesting to note to what degree would you have a skewing towards a fast life or the slow life strategists in terms of women? Would you have
Yeah.
more of them acting in a having that longer term view, or would it be still, I want the best that I can get short term? And a lot of that too, I think, is in such a scenario, do you still have open access to birth control? Because I know, was it Clarence Thomas that he had hinted at something like that? We might go back and revisit birth control.
Yeah, they're going to
yeah. So that could be a big deal, at least in the areas. Now, obviously, you're going to have some kind of black market, but if you have more of a, like we're heading to the supply chain collapse and that's not widely available, you never know.
Yeah. You said the fast life and slow life strategy. I've heard about that, but I've never heard it put that way. I've always heard of it as RK theory. So do you know if there's a significant difference between the two, or are they basically the same thing?
I think they are interrelated, just that there are some women who are, wanting to have kids and invest more in a guy for the long term. And there are the women that are trying to get the best traits in men on a short-term basis, and they'll have typically more partners. At least that's the theory. But the only thing I was a little bit leery with Ed Dutton when he brought that up, and he said, well, incels should go to church. Yes, but there are a lot of women in church that are there because, they're just trying to get a sucker, honestly. In fact, I don't know if you saw that clip that was going around a few months back where that black pastor was telling guys, you got to get up your asses and marry these single moms. It's like, okay, yeah, because a lot of churches have a lot of single moms. That's what I've come across.
Yeah. So there's a second, Zach, for joining. Yeah, I've been thinking about, I'm a deist. That's how I've always thought about things, and I think it would probably be in my benefit socially and in the sexual marketplace to probably return to the church system.
Yeah.
So.
Now, do you see that as, I would imagine, more of a hierarchical model like Catholic or Orthodox, or the kind of Protestant type stuff?
I think a Unitarian, Universalist. Like I'm a deist, so I'm more open to everything. I'm just gonna absorb and see what works for me socially.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think one of the conclusions the guy was just reading a biography on, but he had come to, is that because he had been raised very traditional Catholic and then he rebelled against it, but he said it wasn't so much important to believe in God as long as you were believing. So it was almost like a way to power your life forward, regardless of whether you're going to go to heaven or not in the end, whether that's a real thing. So. Have you ever read that Irrational Atheist book by Vox Day?
No, I've not.
Okay, yeah, I was eyeing that. I'm not sure how good it is. I have read his book on Jordan Peterson, which was also Vox Day. He's kind of arrogant, so it does bleed through the pages a bit, but definitely, I know Jordan Peterson. I mean, I guess there is some value to what he says. There's some moments where I'm just, dude, you're in over your own head. Just back off a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely think he's overexposed.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he took that break because of the medical situation. I think that was healthy for him, both socially, financially, and with that level of exposure. But I think there needs to be some more pull from a different direction that can help, balance the social order.
Yeah, I saw the clips from that address to Muslims. I kind of chuckled over that because, it's just that classic, oh, here's how you can solve all your problems. Yeah, we've been having these problems for a long time. I'm sure if that solution was, if that was actually the answer, it would have happened by now. Just talk to a Sunni if you're a Shia. I'm like, okay, yeah.
Yeah. Well, another thing I've noticed is that, not noticed. I've been speaking to somebody in mainland China, and he says that Jordan Peters is actually very big there. So I guess in a way that kind of gravity is kind of important because it does help, provide a balance to that level of influence and control.
Yeah.
But I guess it just needs more evenly distributed. So.
Oh, yeah. And that's going to be interesting to see because from what I've gathered, there is a lot more internal dissent in China on account of the fact that you have a growing middle class and people
Yeah.
are going to engage with more ideas. Obviously, you can only control the internet so much.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think it was Bannon who said that Chinese can go from being the most rational people in the world, but on like nationalist issues, they can just
Yeah.
turn the other way. I remember in college, I had a professor, we were talking about Taiwan, and I
Yeah.
guess he had made a remark to this Chinese guy. He said, you know what, I'm just sick of it. I can't wait for Taiwan to go independent. And this Chinese dude got very angry. He said, how can you say that? That's like us saying that, what if Hawaii was to become independent? And he's like, well, I don't care. So, but,
Yeah.
Taiwan's a little bit
Well,
more important. So,
well, it's not going to be the same as in Hawaii, where you got the full fruit companies going to hijack
Yeah.
the government and you hand it over to the United States as a silver platter. So it could be a little more conflict there.
That actually happened.
Yeah. So I don't know.
well, didn't you have, granted, that was on a smaller scale, that Operation
Yeah.
Red Dog, or those,
I think-
those, what was it? David Duke was involved in that or something, like take over the government and, create this little, I don't know if it was really supposed to be an ethno state. I think it was just a business deal, honestly, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just kind of transitioned and worked out that way at the end of the day. So thanks, Dole.
okay. But it's a funny dynamic when you realize that there are certain modern nations that were literally founded as corporations.
Yeah.
I know, like New Zealand, obviously Zimbabwe. I mean, Rhodesia, but it's very different now. But yeah.
Do you know much about Lysander Spinner?
I've heard the name. I need to look more into it.
Yeah. So basically, he was a constitutional lawyer and scholar that was against the Constitution. He thought it was like it communalized the state and centralized it.
Yeah.
So, Zach, do you want to put anything in about Spinner? Okay. But
So he was more of a anti-federalist, anti-administration type.
he's a radical individualist. So I know it's pretty toxic nowadays, but back in the day that was totally different. It wasn't exactly the same narrative as it is now. So like he got it. Franklin Douglas, I think it was. He taught him, on law and stuff like that. So
Okay.
yeah, he was a big influence for him. But
Yeah, I was reading something by Sam Francis. I'm actually currently reading it, Beautiful Losers, about the conservative movement. He had this section on Henry Clay, who I read a biography on a couple of years ago. But he said basically Clay's failure is that he could never join together the different factions of the United States to win the presidential election. That he got really close, I think, on 2 occasions, but he could never quite pull it off. I guess because his specific vision was just cannot be accommodated with others. So it's just a really interesting dynamic when you have a union of a bunch of different states that are in their own way jockeying for their interests, as opposed to not always the national interest, how you can bring that about. And that's one of the reasons I believe our national politics is less effective. Part of it's by design. Part of it's just because now with the media, it's more advantageous to be a radical than to actually compromise.
Yeah. So what do you, with all this information that you've gathered, just because, I mean, you're interested in all this sort of stuff, what do you expect to do with it?
I'd like to pick up on that, actually. The radicalization of the media, that kind of goes back towards William Jennings Bryan, wouldn't you think? With the idea of yellow journalism about the turn of the 20th century, 1890s, turn of the 20th century.
Oh yeah, no, I definitely think there's an angle there, and the very fact that, like, I mean, the Wizard of Oz, I didn't realize that was essentially based off of various aspects to American politics. I want to say, wasn't the Tin Woodman? Wasn't he William Jennings? No, it was the Lion. I think it was the
It was
Lion.
the Lion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he couldn't quite fight. Now I've heard that might have been though from a book by Alan Greenspan, so take it with a grain of salt. But I think they said if the free silver movement had been successful, it would have been disastrous financially for the country. But that could also be from an established, financier's point of view.
Yeah. Anything else there? Okay. Like I was starting to say, what do you see long term? You're going to use all this information that you record on and research. What do you think pragmatically you can do with it?
I did have an idea to start actually streaming kind of in a vlog fashion. And I think it's about, especially with a lot of these young men, trying to channel it towards something more productive, because I believe, like I was saying earlier, there's only so much that you can improve yourself. You can go overseas. You can try to, have some niceties in life, no doubt, if you follow the right path. But I think on a larger scale, if we don't want, for those that are going to be pro-natalist, if you want your children to inherit something better, we're going to have to, at some level, organize. We're going to have to be rational, understand how the system works, not have these crazy ideas like you're going to topple the government. Like that does not work unless you got the military on your side. And you look at the military, you have to do it constitutionally, and there are ways. And that's some of the stuff I'm laying out in the book I'm writing currently. People don't realize how much power the president has if he uses it properly. So that needs to be the focus. People that are lawyers, that are good at writing, that are good at communication, working towards something, instead of, one of the downsides of the right wing, as I'm sure you come across online, it so quickly devolves into just this, personality conflict, much like you see in the manosphere. People are just attacking each other. It's like, you have to be disciplined. And that's the only way forward if we want, our kids or grandkids to have a more stable moral atmosphere to grow up in.
I think that's something that's significant. It's becoming more and more of an issue every day, is that unstable and immoral atmosphere. So, and as your point about throwing the government, apparently there's a Twitter page that I like to follow, and it's basically saying that, or it goes through law by law, and it just lists stupid laws and stuff like that. But if you want to have an insurrection against the United States government, you had to register with the United States government.
Yeah.
So, well, I guess if you want to go to jail, that's the best way to do it.
Well, and that's the thing too, that as clownish as the whole thing was last year, and I guess end of 2020, it could have been successful, what they were trying to pull off legally, because a lot of stuff with a law, it is based upon interpretation. And we've seen with various Supreme Court cases. So you can be successful. The problem with Trump, it was a lack of competency and professionalism. Like, they didn't start cleaning house at the various bureaucracies until, I think, spring of 2020. And if you really want to have lasting impact, you need to be doing that day one, start replacing people. But one thing that I'm including in terms of presidential power, Judge Bork, before he passed away, had an interview where he said federal laws, when they're passed, should have a notwithstanding clause. So regardless of how court rules, it's going to be in place for 5 years. Well, why not attach that to an executive order? Trump wasn't able to actually begin proper construction of the wall, I think, until like 2 or 3 years into his presidency, because all the courts kept, mucking it up. And same thing with some of these, like the sanctuary city defunding. So you have to act decisively, but you also have to be creative with the legal system if you want to do it.
Yeah,
And
it's harder and harder to scale as time goes on.
yeah. And people say, well, if only Congress would do this. It's like Congress is dysfunctional, honestly, in some respects by design, like we talked about with the states jockeying for their interests. But
Yeah,
there is literally no advantage as a politician to say, okay, let's agree and compromise, because you're going to be, I mean, think about it. You had John Boehner and he was attacked as a rhino. And then people said, oh, Paul Ryan's the strong conservative running with Romney. And then he
Yeah.
was chosen to replace Boehner as supposedly a reliable conservative. Then, of course, the Trump people were saying, oh, he's a freaking rhino. So you're seeing it. You saw it in 2010. You're seeing it this year. Republicans are endangering Senate victories by choosing some really stupid candidates. And you have to have that discipline. So it's like, would it have been much worse to have Luther Strange win in Alabama over losing because you got Roy Moore, who had some, some creepy stuff about him, let's be real. Maybe not back when he was younger. So sometimes that whole drive to purity at any cost actually hampers your efforts to get anything done, because then you're just nominating unelectable people and you're not able to get enough votes to pass stuff.
Yeah. And another way to put it is, if you run as an impure person, you won't have anything to worry about.
Yeah.
But
True enough.
at the same time, you risk a lot on a personal level, because there's a lot more aggressive, resistance towards your narrative, your views. So,
And that was the other thing that, go ahead, sorry.
It's just a balance.
Well, and stuff like that, you see that there's a really good quote from the book. I have it here. It's by Disraeli. It's a novel, but it's Coningsby. I'm going to include it in the book I'm writing, but basically he's talking about how conservatives want to protect institutions by not really exercising power. And you see this with the use of reconciliation, that the Democrats came in, they're like, yeah, we're not going to just use it once. We're going to be very flexible. They have been fairly successful, regardless whether you think, he's inflating the currency and he's going to end up, crashing and burning. But they're a lot more effective at pursuing their agenda. Whereas the GOP comes in, they're like, oh, wait, we have to govern. How are we supposed to do this? You're saying you want to get rid of Obamacare for a good 7 years straight, and you don't have a plan that people can agree with on once you actually empower. It means that you're not really serious about governing. And that's a big problem.
It goes back to that concept of the roadmap. Like, it's like with Bitcoin Core and Bitcoin Cash. They had these people that hijacked the movement with Bitcoin Core, and all they care about is the cost. Meanwhile, you got people that are interested in the technology with Bitcoin Cash. They don't care about the cost. They just want to create a functioning alternative.
Right. Yeah.
That way. And this is what I was telling David. I was trying to tell David Friedman on our last episode. It's like, that you're going to crash a plane. Do you want to run into a brick wall, or do you want to be able to land it so that there's as little violence and impact, as minimal amount of impact to the ground as possible when you land? There's always going to be a victim, but if there's less victims because of this transition period, then it seems like it'd be a lot. You need to have that option, and censorship just isn't working. So
it's also imperative that when you have power, there's a quote attributed to Kerensky, which I don't know if it's actually his, but people were saying, why didn't you do something about Lenin? And he said, sometimes the hardest thing about having power is using it. Well, you have to have right wingers that are willing to do things which actually impact their opponents and weaken their opponents. So if you say we're going to pass this reconciliation bill and it's going to cut funding to National Endowment for Humanities, which funds a lot of Marxist academics and projects, that is doing damage. You're like, well, but then they'll use it against us. Well, your goal is you need to, when you have power, you want to keep power preferably, but you also have to weaken your opponents. If you go like, well, we can't do that, we can't, well, then they're going to come in and they're going to do it to you. And you've seen with Biden, even though he was supposedly the nice, moderate guy to unite the country, they are going all out. I mean, I believe they're going to indict Trump. Whether they'll convict him, we'll see, but they're not holding back. because they understand how to use power. And that's why I think you're seeing under I think it's called like the NRX, the New Reactionaries. You're seeing a lot of interest in Burnham, Carl Schmitt, because these are ideas that in the past would be an anathema to conservatives, but people are realizing if you don't do anything, you are going to get steamrolled inevitably. Someone's going to think about it before you actually take action.
Well, I just don't know what's going to happen. We want for the best, but we can predict the future. It's just trying to read a book that you don't know what, you can only make guesses, an educated guess.
Yeah.
So
you can't map everything out, but I still think it's important to have a vision and at least have different contingencies, because like I said, I think, and maybe that was expected, but I don't think that there was any general understanding that that Trump was going to win. But once he did, you have to have that, okay, now we're in serious mode. But it was like, oh shoot, let's now just get mixed up in petty drama and the internet. So
they didn't have an exit strategy, and they probably should.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll find out what happens.
Yeah.
But thank you for joining us.
Yeah, and it was a really good discussion. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
So until next time.
All right. You guys have a good night.
All right.
Yeah, take care.
Bye. Well, that was a good information session there with Martin Goldberg. So a lot of stuff to talk about.
Speaking of such, I wonder, and I failed to ask this question, but do you think the idea of monogamy is what helps accelerate the decentralization of the sexual marketplace?
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that's a significant contributor to the decentralization of the sexual marketplace.
The only reason I ask is maybe if we get our heads out of our asses and understand that naturally the institute of marriage that's all it is. It's an institution established by cultural orders, religious bound, political, whatever. I mean, it's a status symbol essentially. It doesn't have any bare meaning prior to the traditions of human culture. How do you think the idea of marriage worked? There was no such thing as marriage realistically, but I mean, at the same time, it was there. But the notion is procreation, reproductive. And then, of course, over time, as cultures evolved and civilization expanded and institutions were put in place because of those confound cultures, that's where you get led into the twist that, well, maybe it should be 1 and 1, or 1 and 2, or 2 and 2, or I mean, at one point, I mean, you had many different cultures, especially within the Turkish and the Arabic cultures prior to Islam, that ended up expanding into the Islamic faith as it evolved and expanded, where you had sometimes over 100 plus concubines, typically for the noble class, typically for like the sultan, not the commoner for the most part, but the elites are able to do what the elites do, where as the common man has to be bestowed in this influence of well, not really, an influence like control factor. You do as I say, but not what I do. And in reality, I mean, you have, in order to pluck an air, you gotta have a child, right? You got to have a
Yeah.
male child typically back in those days, and many of these sultans would have, or caliphs, however you, whatever, would have a number of concubines that they would sleep with, besides their wife. So just in case the queen, the wife, didn't produce an heir, you had another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he's talking about the decentralization of the sexual marketplace. And that goes back to what he was talking about with the slow life strategy or the RK theory. That, some people have a large selection of their children, like that with concubines, and then some people just only have one or two children their entire life. More than one child used to be really rare. So, well, I'm sorry, I'm an idiot. Uh, Multiple children used to be the norm for one family because of the amount of people who passed away, because of just reality, the
Well,
culture.
not only that, in this country, and especially in the late 19th century, that was one custom, but
Yeah,
it also had a lot to do with an employment factor, a labor factor too, because the more kids you have on the farm, I mean, the farm. Well, I mean, we were, especially in this country, we were very agrarian,
yeah,
but anywhere that's an agrarian society, you need workers, right?
yeah,
Um, well, cheap labor, children,
yeah,
your children. So, a factor tied into both the element of uh, needing a labor force, while also the acknowledgement that not every child lived past 5,
yeah.
um,
It's
kind of
unfortunate.
culminated that. So, you can go on.
That's just an unfortunate fact of that was reality.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's unfortunate, but it was you said it. Yeah, I mean, reality.
Yeah,
I mean, that's just how they lived in those days, and so you had bigger families.
yeah,
By the middle of the 20th century, you didn't need that big of a family. I mean, especially when you live in a small little subdivision, how, yeah, family house in the middle of the suburbs. I mean, on a like a little half-acre lot. I
yeah,
mean, dad goes out and works, comes home, mom cleans and cooks and takes care of the kids, and you don't really need all that responsibility. Yeah, you don't have that large scale responsibility besides like a household.
yeah,
So dad's making the money, mom's running the house. You only need like 2, 3 kids. I mean, 2, 3 kids, and that's, I mean, and that's affordable as well, because then you start getting into the standard of the financial system that we have put ourselves into, and that's that kind of contributes to the circumstance of how like the 50s was. But one thing I did like what he said was, I mean, uh, everybody wants to go back to the 1950s with this traditional lifestyle of marriage and the sanctity of it, and the husband and the wife and the 2 kids and the dog and the perfect home and whatever. Um, but I mean, there was just as much degeneracy, just like he said, that was going on in the 50s, 60s, and
yeah,
especially the 70s. I mean, it was just as decentralized because everybody has to cut loose.
yeah. I mean,
No,
everyone has to see thinks that it's just apple pie and a Betty Boop and all that, but I mean, back in the 50s, they were using aluminum foil for as condoms, and I mean,
mhm.
it's all a narrative.
Well,
It's not as perfect as they make it sound.
there's a movie that it's kind of corny and stupid. It's
Yeah,
actually kind of funny though, but it came out in the 80s, and it's like a parody comedy about life as a teenage boy and in getting into all those shenanigans, sexual shenanigans for the most part,
yeah.
called Porky's.
Oh, I know.
Everybody, yeah, Porky's. That's And that kind of sums it up, actually.
Yeah.
That sums it up. It wasn't that you had perfect little angels as teenagers. No, they were teenagers like any teenager. They were
Yeah.
rebellious. They were sexually maturing, while still being mentally immature for the matter, yeah, and emotionally immature for
Yeah.
that matter. And it was just one big party.
Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, you think about it, like people used to go, oh, I go visit my aunt for 8 months. It's because they got pregnant,
Mhm,
have the child, and then come back and try
mhm,
to resettle in society,
mhm.
you know. And
Yeah.
then you got stuff like the Scarlet Letter, and
Mhm,
it, if you haven't read the Scarlet Letter, I mean, it's 2022. Not a lot of
mhm,
people go back into those older books, but it's just basically people getting ostracized for having sexual relationships outside of marriage.
mhm.
So
Well, I mean, we hit it on a bunch of names that you called out. You wanted me to talk about Spooner. I opted not to. I don't think Spooner was a good character for this narrative here. So didn't really want to spoil Spooner on
yeah,
anybody more.
yeah,
I think he's a different basis, but Sterner and Chesterton
yeah,
were definitely two names that came about that the way that they thrived, the way that they thought, the way that they promoted their ideas, kind of
yeah,
co-ops them. They co-opt each other into the realm of the sexual marketplace when it
yeah.
comes down to it.
Well, part of that was as I was curious about what Martin had knew and who he knew. So
And quite frankly, I just wanted to sit back and listen to you guys talk.
yeah,
So I had nothing really to say. I just wanted to listen to you guys talk.
well, that's okay.
You, you were having a good conversation. I didn't want to butt in.
I appreciate being my partner here, and sometimes we can just sit back and listen. That's okay. It's
Hmm.
just like a member of the audience.
Hmm. But if there is one thing of advice that I could give you after this, it's don't jump forward into the pond of what everybody else says we should do.
Yeah,
If you don't want to go to Cambodia or Thailand or Taiwan and pick up a submissive wife, don't do it. I mean, you can. That's your choice. If that's your prerogative, but it may not work out.
yeah.
Just like it may not work out here.
I mean, we both know somebody from our school that did something like that. I don't
She
think it
was like
worked out like
12.
I don't think she was literally 12, but physically she looked like a 12-year-old. So
Physically, yeah,
yeah, yeah,
physiologically, she looked like she was about 6.
yeah,
She was 12, dude.
yeah.
I'm sorry.
I don't know. People, everybody has a different strategy, I guess.
Hmm.
The police, they're gonna, if they say something's inappropriate, they're gonna act on it. So
Hmm. So, but yeah, that's that, yeah, yes, everybody. That's the reason why you're gonna hear a lot of them speak, a lot of Martin speak. Um, that it is what it is. Sometimes you just take a seat and
yeah,
let people talk.
yeah,
And in fact, there's a good quote about it. I forget who said it, but it might have been Mark Twain actually. First off, one quote is as stupid does." That's a good quote. But another quote that I've always been reminded of as a from a kid all the way up to being a grown adult is if you have nothing to say at all, don't say anything. If you have nothing intelligent to say at all, don't say anything because it's better for people to presume you're stupid when you're not saying anything than to open your mouth and prove that you're an idiot.
I like to prove I'm an idiot on our program all the time.
So sometimes it's good to sit back and absorb knowledge
Yeah.
and get other perspectives before you jump in.
Yeah.
Also, the fruit thing. You were talking about Hawaii. I
Yeah.
missed that. Although the about Duke, the was it the Dole Fruit Company? It was a Dole
Dole.
Fruit
Yeah,
Company.
I believe it's Dole.
That was in Hawaii, but I misstepped and I actually was jumping a tad bit further if I would have elaborated more. So I'm going to elaborate what I meant by that really did happen. I was trying to insinuate the United Fruit Company's CIA exploits in Guatemala that led to the Guatemalan Revolution and Civil War that lasted for damn near a decade.
Yeah.
So, two instances actually, when it comes down to that. I mean, what real history, how Hawaii became a state was literally the Dole Fruit Corporation. And that's how Hawaii became a territory of the United States was because of fruit corporatists, and then how Guatemala became such a chaotic and enthralled and division, political distress in the 70s was, and honestly now too, was because of our CIA's intervention with the United Fruit Company, an American company, by the way.
The Great Fruit Conspiracy.
Yeah, it's a great, yeah. So everything aligns from the sexual marketplace to we're creating our own conspiracy theory, everybody, from the sexual marketplace all the way to the political divisions in Washington. It all coincides with Dole and United Fruit and
And
Jaquita.
Dole. I wonder if they're related to Bob Dole.
Bob Dole's dead, so who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Well,
We will never know.
all the secrets went into the grave with them.
Yeah. So, but with that, anything else?
No, appreciate you sticking out with us and that everybody was open to listen to what we had to say. So,
I did walk away for a little bit. I was still listening,
Yeah.
but when I walked away, I hope you all saw. And he actually works out for this segment that we were discussing because
yeah,
he's kind of a womanizer. Victor Sullivan, everybody, Sully,
yeah,
play Uncharted, great game, love it, greatest character ever. Oh, greatest side character ever, a companion to the main character, Nathan Drake. He is kind of like his go-to guy, his compadre, his father figure, and he's just a goofy, creepy old man, and
yeah.
he's awesome. And he is definitely one for the decentralized sexual marketplace.
Well, I had to check that game out.
It's fantastic. I'm actually replaying Uncharted 4 right now
Yeah,
on my PlayStation 4 because it's such a good game. It's from Naughty Dog, which did Crash Bandicoot.
yeah.
So what's cool about 4 is you get to actually play you get to play the boulder chase on Crash Bandicoot not once but twice, the beginning of the game and at the end.
That's
So
not too bad.
yeah, that's
Little
probably.
Easter right there.
hmm And honestly, when you play the game, it's basically playing Crash Bandicoot, except for you're human.
It's like Perfect Dark. You know how in
Mhm.
Perfect Dark he has little pieces of cheese that have absolutely no connection with the
Mhm.
storyline. It's just there to be there. So
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah.
So, well, with that, everybody, you know what to do. You know where to go,
Thanks for visiting us. Thanks for watching.
and make sure you find Martin Goldberg's YouTube page if you haven't already.
He's pretty
And
entertaining.
it is. It's very informative, very entertaining. Go over there, give him a like. Smash that like button for him. go ahead and share his videos, so all his content, get it out to the world, and make a comment or not, and then subscribe and ring that bell for notifications, because we all know YouTube, you like to mess with people a little bit. Yeah, do that for Martin Goldberg, and at the same time on YouTube, why don't you do that for us as well? I mean, smash that like button, comment or not, share, and subscribe and hit that bell for notifications. So, thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks for watching. Peace.
Peace.